There is a number on your retirement spreadsheet, and there's a good chance it is lying to you. It is the number that says you cannot stop yet, the one that keeps you at a desk another 5, 8, 10 years. And all of it while you call yourself responsible. Here is what almost nobody tells you about that number. It was never built to be a target. It was built to be a fire drill. The rule behind it is the famous 4% rule. It was built to survive one thing, the single worst stretch of markets in American history. Then a researcher checked what actually happened to the people who used it. He found something strange. Almost none of them ran out of money. Most of them died with far more than they started with. They spent their whole retirement overpaying for a disaster, and for nearly everyone, it never arrived. But that is only half of the trap. The other half is worse, and almost no one talks about it. The way most people use that number, they could get it exactly right, and still walk straight into the one thing that sinks in early retirement. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance, the kind that actually works for normal people, not the kind that gets you to click a thumbnail. No motivational fluff or fantasy returns. We just discuss what the math actually does over time. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. Start with where that scary number comes from. It changes the whole picture once you really see it. The 4% rule is simple. You pull 4% of your investments in year one. You raise it with inflation each year after. And the money should last about 30 years. Flip it around. It says you need 25 times your annual spending saved. If you spend $50,000 a year, that is $1.25 million. That is the wall. Most people think they have to hit it before they are allowed to stop. Here's the part that changes the picture. That rule was not built for an average outcome. It was built for the apocalypse. It was designed to survive the worst possible moment in history to retire. Picture the person who walked out right before markets collapsed, and the markets stayed down for years. The entire purpose of the rule is one thing: keep that single unluckiest person from going broke. So what happened to everyone else? A researcher named Michael Kitcey studied every 30-year retirement window in modern market history. He tracked the people who followed the 4% rule. The results are almost funny. In 96% of those windows, the retiree finished the 30 years with more money than they started with. Not less, more. Not less, more. It goes further. More than 2/3 of the time, they ended with more than double what they began with. The median retiree finished with about 2.8 times their starting nest egg, still sitting there untouched. 1 in 6 ended with more than 5 times what they retired on. Let that land. The typical person following this rule does not scrape by. They die wealthy, often wealthier than the day they walked out. In the entire modern era of markets, the rule actually failed only a handful of times. You can count them on one hand. It was the people who retired right into 1929, into 1937, into 1965 and 1966. That is basically the whole list. So think about what that means for you. You've been told to climb a wall built for a catastrophe. And that catastrophe almost never happens. You have been saving for the unluckiest retiree in a century. You are almost certainly not that person, not even close. That number is already this cautious. Every extra year you grind to pad it, you lose. That year gets handed to your heirs instead of you. Now, I promised you honesty, so here's the footnote, and it matters. Retire at 55, and your money might need to last not 30 years, but 40 or 45. Over a longer stretch, a bad start has more room to do damage. So the careful move is to shade your number down. Use around 3.5% instead of 4%. That is the same as aiming for about 30 times your spending, instead of 25. A little more to save. For a sturdier plan over a long life. But even at that more careful 3.5%, the lopsided story holds. In Kitz's data, the long retirement cases stayed lopsided too. Half still ended with more than 9 times what they started with. So I am not telling you to cut your safety margin. Keep it. I am telling you the wall is much further behind you than you think. Now the second half of the trap. It is the bigger one. The framing you see is some version math makes one giant hidden assumption. It assumes your investment account pays for 100% of your spending. Alone. For the rest of your life. As if your portfolio is one tired horse, pulling the whole wagon uphill, alone, forever. That is not how a real retirement at 55 works. Your portfolio has help coming. That help shrinks the pile you really need. There are three levers. Once you see them, the number gets a lot friendlier. The first lever is Social Security. It does not show up at 55, but it is coming. For most people, it starts between 62 and 67, often around $2,000 a month, and it rises with inflation for life. So your portfolio does not have to fund your whole life, it mostly has to cover the bridge. That is the years between 55 and the day Social Security switches on. The second lever is your house. Reach retirement with the mortgage gone and you erase your single biggest monthly bill. For most families, nothing else is close. And here's the multiplier that people miss. Every dollar you cut from spending does more than save you a dollar. It shrinks your finish line by 25 or 30 times that amount. Killing a $1,500 mortgage payment is not worth $1,500. In retirement math, it is worth around $450,000 off your target. The third lever is a little income on your own term. Retiring at 55 does not have to mean you never earn another dollar. Most people who leave that early are healthy and restless. They end up doing something anyway. 2 days a week of consulting, a small side thing, or a hobby that trickles in a little money. The point is not to keep grinding. The point is what a modest early income does. You barely touch the portfolio, so it keeps compounding instead of shrinking. Put the three levers together. This is where 55 stops being a fantasy and becomes arithmetic. Picture someone who needs $50,000 a year. The full load rule says they need $1.25 million. Only then can they even think about stopping. That feels impossible at 55, so they keep working. Now pull the levers. They finish the mortgage, and real spending drops to $38,000. They pick up consulting they actually enjoy, 2 days a week. It brings in $20,000 for the first several years. So in those early bridge years, the investments only cover the gap. That gap is about $18,000 a year. That is a different planet from $50,000. And because they are barely drawing on it, the portfolio keeps growing behind them. Take $500,000. Draw just that $18,000 a year. Grow it at 6%. After 10 years, it has grown to about $658,000. It went up while they were out living. Then, right as the consulting winds down, Social Security switches on and covers most of what is left. The enormous pile they thought they needed at 55 was never required. They needed a bridge, not a 40-year solo marathon. So the money case for leaving at 55 is strong. But strong is not the same as simple. There are two risks to respect. But I am not going to hand you only the good news. There is a second number the 4% rule hides. And it is the one that actually sinks early retirements. It is called sequence risk. It is the reason two people can do everything identically and land in completely different places. My neighbor Paul lived the good version of this. He walked away at 54 with about $2 million. The market was kind in his early years. 14 years later, he is 68, and the account sits near $2.4 million. He spent a decade and a half retired, and the pile still grew. Paul did nothing clever. He just happened to retire into a friendly sequence, and it carried him. Here's the cruel part. Your long-term average return can be fine, and you can still run out of money. What matters is the order the returns show up in, especially in the first few years. Take money out of a falling portfolio early, and you sell shares you can never buy back. When the recovery finally comes, there is less left to recover. Look at real market history. Two people each retire with exactly $1 million. Each one starts at 4%, taking $40,000 a year, raised for inflation. The only difference is the year they walked out. The first retires in 1995, right before 5 booming years. 15 years later, after living the whole time on that portfolio, they sit on about $2.2 million. It more than doubled in value even while they spent from it the whole time. The second person retires in 2000, right into 3 straight losing years, the same million, a 4% start, same as the first person. 15 years later, they have about 411,000 left, and it is still dropping. Same rule, same starting balance, same withdrawal. One ends with 2.2 million, the other ends with 411,000. The only thing that changed was the weather in the first few years, and there was nothing either of them could do about the weather. This is what the single number on your spreadsheet hides. It shows you an average. It says nothing about the order, and you do not get to choose your order. Nobody hands you a schedule of which years boom and which years crash. You find out after you have already jumped. That is not a reason to stay scared at your desk forever. It is a reason to build a plan that survives a bad draw instead of one that only works if the weather cooperates. And for someone retiring at 55 with a long road ahead, the order in those first years is the whole ball game. Here's the good news. Sequence risk is not a reason to work 10 more years. It is a reason to be ready for a bad start. The defense is simple, and it has a name. It is called a cash bucket. You keep 2 or 3 years of spending in plain cash, separate from your investments. When the market has an ugly first year, you spend from the bucket. You leave the stocks alone to recover. You are never forced to sell low because you are not selling stocks at all that year. The bucket is small, it is boring, and it is the whole difference between the 2 million ending and the 411,000 ending. You keep a couple of years of spending in cash. That way, a rough first year never forces you to sell stocks at the bottom. You stay flexible, ready to trim spending a little if the market opens ugly. And you remember that third lever, the part-time income. It protects you most in exactly the years a bad sequence will hurt the most. Now, the other obstacle I will not pretend away because it stops more early retirements than any spreadsheet. Health insurance. If you retire at 55, you have a 10-year gap before Medicare starts at 65, and you have to cover it yourself. For most early retirees, that means a plan through the government marketplace. And I will be straight with you, it got more expensive this year. A temporary boost to the subsidies that had been in place since 2021 expired at the end of 2025, and premiums jumped hard in 2026. An unsubsidized 55-year-old can be looking at close to $10,000 a year, and a 64-year-old far more than that. But here's the part that still works in your favor, and it is specific. The subsidy is based on your taxable income, not your wealth. An early retiree living partly off savings in a paid-off house can often keep taxable income low enough to still qualify for real help. Contributing to an HSA lowers that income number the same way a 401k used to, so it is a genuine hurdle, and a solvable one, as long as you plan for it on purpose instead of letting it ambush you. So the money case is real with eyes open on both risks, but there is a second half of this decision. It matters more than any of the math. No spreadsheet can fix it if you get it wrong. Ask people who retired late what they would change. Almost none of them say they wish they had worked longer. What they say is they wish they had more good, strong years on the other side. We picture aging as a slow, gentle slope. But the body does not always read the memo. A Stanford study published in 2024 tracked thousands of molecules in people over time. It found aging seems to arrive in waves, not a smooth glide. One notable shift lands around the early 60s. It is one study and a small one, so hold it loosely. But it matches what retirees describe, which is that the body seems to change gears right around 60. So sit with the timing. Say you are 55 and the plan is to grind until 65 and then finally start living. You are scheduling your adventure to begin right as your body may be shifting into a lower gear. You would spend your last decade of reliably strong years at a desk, and you would spend it to pad a cushion the math says you will likely never need. That is the worst trade in this whole plan. You are paying with the one thing you cannot earn more of to buy more of the one thing you already have plenty of. Let me be fair, because I promised I would. This is not magic, and it is not for everyone. Say you are 55 with very little saved and no paid-off house. The honest answer is that you have more work to do. Pretending otherwise would set you up to fail. The 3 levers are what make 55 real. They are not wishful thinking, and you do have to actually have them in place. And the 2 risks are real. A single number that ignores sequence risk and ignores the health gap is a number that can get you hurt. So the answer is not to trust the 4% wall, and it is also not to ignore it. The answer is to stop letting one oversimplified number make a decision this big. So here is your one move this week. Stop measuring yourself against the full load wall, the one that pretends your portfolio funds everything forever. Run your real number instead. Take your spending. Subtract what a paid-off house, a little part-time income, and eventual Social Security will cover. Only then look at what your investments actually have to do. Then set aside a cash cushion for a bad first few years and price out the health bridge honestly. A lot of you are going to find you are standing much closer to the finish line than that scary number ever let you believe. And a few of you are going to find you are not there yet, and now you will know exactly which levers to go build. Do one more thing before you decide anything. Write down your 3 levers honestly. Is the mortgage gone or close? Could you earn a little on your own terms for a few years? Do you know what Social Security will actually pay you and when? Those 3 answers turn the scary wall into a real personal number. And the real number is almost always smaller than the wall that has been scaring you. Tell me in the comments which number has been running your life, the scary full load wall or your real one. And tell me which lever you are missing. I read every comment and I reply to as many as I can. And if you want the next video, hit subscribe. It is the step-by-step on pulling money out of your retirement accounts before 59 and a half, without handing the government a penalty. I'll see you in the next one.